I walked in on my brother kissing my husband at a family gathering, and now they want me to stay married to keep up appearances while they continue their secret relationship. Sarah, we need to talk. Please, just listen. I heard the words, but they didn't register. My mind was too busy reeling, trying to process what I had just seen. The image burned into my brain. My brother Ryan, 34M, and my husband, Ethan, 36M, standing in the kitchen at our family gathering, their lips locked in a kiss I never thought I would witness. How did this even happen? How long had it been happening? It was like time slowed down. I'd walked into the kitchen expecting to grab more drinks for the party, which was in full swing in the backyard, only to see them, my husband and my brother, in a moment so intimate, so secretive, that it felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. I dropped the tray I was holding, and the loud clatter of glass hitting the tiles startled them apart. Ethan looked at me, his face pale, eyes wide with panic. Ryan just stood there frozen, as if he were waiting for the world to end. In that moment, my world had ended. The shock was too overwhelming to allow room for anything else. What the hell is this? I finally managed, my voice barely more than a whisper. Neither of them answered right away. Ryan was the first to speak, but his words were choked with guilt. Sarah, I can explain. It's not what you think. I almost laughed, the absurdity of that statement hitting me harder than anything else. It's not what I think. Really, because it looked pretty damn clear to me. Ethan, who had been silent, stepped forward, his hands out like he was trying to calm me down. Sarah, please, just let us explain. It's complicated. Complicated, I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. You're my husband, Ethan, and that's my brother. There's nothing complicated about this. You've been lying to me. Both of you. The room felt suffocating. The party outside, the laughing, the music, the clinking of glasses, felt like it was happening in another world. In this moment, it was just the three of us, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't have imagined. How long? I asked, my voice tight. How long has this been going on? Ryan looked like he wanted to disappear. He glanced at Ethan, then back at me, his voice trembling. It started last year. We didn't mean for it to happen. Last year. That meant for the past year, they had been sneaking behind my back. A whole year of lies, of pretending everything was normal while they carried on their affair right under my nose. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. My own brother, my husband, the two people I trusted most in the world. I could feel the rage building, the disbelief turning into something hotter, something darker. So you've been lying to me for a year, both of you. You've been sneaking around, doing God knows what, while I thought we were a family. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes pleading. Sarah, I love you. This doesn't change that. I stared at him, barely able to comprehend what he was saying. Doesn't change that? You just kissed my brother in front of me, and you're telling me it doesn't change anything? How could you do this to me? Ryan, who had been quiet until now, finally found his voice. Sarah, we didn't plan for this. It just happened. And we didn't know how to tell you. We didn't want to hurt you. I turned to him, my brother, my big brother, who had always been there for me, who I had trusted more than anyone. You didn't want to hurt me? How did you think this was going to end, Ryan? Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Tears welled up in his eyes, and for a moment, I saw the brother I had always known, the one who had protected me growing up, who had stood by my side through everything. But now, he was the one tearing my life apart. We tried to stop, Ryan said, his voice cracking. But we, Ethan and I, we care about each other. We didn't want to hurt you, but we couldn't stop. I could barely breathe. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of everything, but it was like trying to catch water with my hands. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't hold on to anything. The betrayal was too deep. Ethan reached for me, but I stepped back, unable to let him touch me. "Don't," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Don't touch me." He dropped his hand, his face full of regret. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." I looked between the two of them, feeling like I didn't even know who they were anymore. The man I had married, the man I had built a life with, and my brother, my own brother, had betrayed me in a way I never could have imagined. "I need you to leave," I said quietly, my voice cold. "Both of you." Ryan opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. "Now." For a moment, they both stood there, like they were waiting for me to change my mind, to say something else. But when I didn't, Ryan finally nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving Ethan standing there, looking lost and broken. "Sarah," Ethan began, but I shook my head, my anger rising again. "Go," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Just go." He hesitated for a moment longer, like he thought there was still something he could say to make this right. But there wasn't. Nothing he could say would ever make this right. He turned and followed Ryan out of the house, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. I could still hear the party going on outside, completely oblivious to the bomb that had just gone off inside. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door they had just walked through, my mind racing with everything that had just happened. I felt hollow, empty, betrayed in a way that went deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. But the worst part wasn't just what they had done. It was what they wanted from me. Because when they finally came back to talk, when they thought I was calm enough to listen, they dropped another bombshell. They didn't want to end things. They didn't want me to leave Ethan, or for Ryan to stop seeing him. No, they had a different plan. They wanted me to stay married to Ethan. For the sake of appearances, for the sake of the family, they wanted me to stay in a marriage where my husband was secretly in love with my brother. They wanted to keep their relationship hidden, to continue their affair while I played the role of the oblivious wife. And they thought I'd agree to it. I didn't think things could get worse. But when Ethan and Ryan came back to talk, they proved me wrong. I sat in the living room, staring at the two of them, still in disbelief that this was even happening. Ethan sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped together, his face filled with regret. Ryan stood awkwardly near the window, like he couldn't bring himself to sit down. Neither of them seemed to know how to start, but it was clear that something bigger was coming. After a tense silence, Ryan finally spoke. "Sarah, we've been talking, and we think we've come up with a solution. A way to make this work without everything falling apart." I stared at him, barely able to process what he was saying. A solution? There was no solution for this. "Make this work," I repeated, incredulous. "You think there's a way to make this work?" Ryan glanced at Ethan, then back at me. "Look, I know how bad this looks, how bad it is. But if we end everything now, if you divorce Ethan, it'll blow up the whole family. It'll ruin everything. Our parents, your friends, everyone. They'll find out. It'll be a scandal. We can't let that happen." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were more worried about the fallout, about the appearance of things, than the fact that they had completely destroyed my life. My stomach churned, the anger inside me building with every word they said. "So what's your grand solution?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "What brilliant plan do you have to fix this?" Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes filled with desperation. "We're not asking you to forgive us. We know we've hurt you. But what we're saying is that we can keep things as they are. You and I stay married. We keep everything looking normal for the family's sake, for the sake of everyone who depends on us." But he hesitated, glancing at Ryan. "But we continue to see each other privately." I blinked, my mind going blank for a moment, as I tried to comprehend what he was saying. You want me to stay married to you so you can keep sneaking around with my brother. Are you insane? Ryan stepped forward, his hands out in a pleading gesture. Sarah, listen. It's not ideal, I know. But think about it. If you leave Ethan, if this gets out, it's going to destroy everything. Our family won't recover from this. Our parents, they'll be devastated. You know what they're like. It'll kill them to know what happened. I stood up, unable to stay seated any longer, the anger bubbling up inside me. So you want me to sacrifice my life, my marriage, just to keep our parents happy? You want me to live a lie so you two can keep your secret? You want me to just pretend that none of this happened? Ethan stood up too, his voice desperate. Sarah, it's not like that. We care about you. I care about you. We don't want to hurt you any more than we already have. But if we come clean, it's going to destroy everything. Please just think about it. I could barely breathe. The audacity of what they were asking was so far beyond anything I could have imagined. They wanted me to be a puppet in my own marriage, to play along while they continued their affair behind closed doors, and they thought I would agree to it. I turned to Ryan, my voice shaking with disbelief. You're really okay with this? You're okay with destroying my marriage and asking me to stay in it, just so you don't have to face the consequences of what you've done? Ryan's face crumpled, guilt flooding his eyes. I never wanted this to happen, Sarah. I didn't plan for any of this. But Ethan and I, we love each other. I know it's wrong, and I hate that we've hurt you. But if you leave, it'll ruin everything. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and ugly. You love each other, and you think that makes it okay. You've been lying to me for a year, betraying me in the worst possible way, and now you want me to stay married to cover for you. Neither of them answered right away. Ethan reached for my hand, but I pulled away, glaring at him. He dropped his hand, his face twisted with pain. Sarah, please, Ethan said quietly. I don't want to lose you. You're still my wife. We can make this work, just in a different way. I shook my head, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill. I'm not your wife, not anymore. Whatever we had is gone. You destroyed it the moment you chose to sneak around with my brother. Ryan took a step closer, his voice soft, almost pleading. We didn't mean for this to happen, Sarah. But now that it has, we're just trying to find a way to make sure everything doesn't fall apart. You can still have a life with Ethan. It'll be like it was before. No one has to know. I turned to him, my anger bubbling over, like it was before. You really think I can pretend that everything is fine, that we can just go back to the way things were? You've been lying to me for a year, Ryan. Both of you. How am I supposed to live with that? Ryan looked down, guilt washing over his face. I don't know, he admitted quietly. But if this gets out, if you leave Ethan, it'll destroy our family. Please, Sarah, just think about it. I couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. They were asking me to sacrifice everything, my dignity, my future, my sanity, just to keep their secret safe. And worse, they were framing it like they were doing me a favor, like this was the best possible solution for everyone. Except me. I stepped back, shaking my head. I can't believe you think I'd ever agree to this. Ethan's eyes were filled with desperation. Sarah, we're not asking you to forgive us. Just let us fix this. We'll figure it out. We don't have to lose everything. I stared at him, the man I had once loved, and realized that I didn't even know who he was anymore. He wasn't the person I had married, the person I had built a life with. He was a stranger, someone who had been lying to me for so long that I didn't even know what was real anymore. I can't live like this, I said quietly, my voice trembling with anger and grief. I won't live like this. Ethan stepped closer, his voice frantic. Sarah, please. No, I said, louder this time. I'm not going to be a part of this. You want to keep your secret? Fine, but I'm not staying in this marriage. I'm not going to pretend that everything is okay just so you two can keep seeing each other behind my back." Ryan's face fell, and for a moment I saw real regret in his eyes. "Sarah, I trusted both of you," I said, my voice breaking. "And you've both betrayed me in the worst way possible. You don't get to ask me to sacrifice my life to cover for your lies." They stood there in silence, their desperate pleas hanging in the air. But I had already made up my mind. There was no going back. I wasn't going to be their puppet. I wasn't going to be their cover story. And I wasn't going to let them destroy me any more than they already had. The days following that confrontation felt like living in a fog. I could hardly wrap my mind around what had happened, let alone the absurdity of what they had asked of me. Ethan and Ryan, two people I loved, trusted, and had built my life around, wanted me to stay married so they could continue their relationship behind my back. For the sake of appearances. I couldn't tell anyone, not yet. I didn't know how. The weight of the betrayal was suffocating, and I spent most of my time either pacing around my house or staring blankly at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. The anger, the hurt, the confusion, none of it seemed to settle. It just swirled inside me, growing heavier with each passing day. Ethan had been staying at a hotel since our last conversation, but Ryan, he wouldn't leave me alone. He kept calling, texting, pleading with me to meet him, to talk, to at least hear him out. But what more was there to say? They had already made their feelings, their intentions clear. There was no explanation that could undo the damage they had caused. One evening, after days of avoiding him, Ryan showed up at my door. I hadn't answered his calls, hadn't responded to his texts, and I guess he finally got tired of waiting for me to come around. I heard the knock, slow and tentative, like he was afraid I wouldn't let him in. And honestly, I didn't want to. But this was my brother, the person I had grown up with. Despite everything, I felt like I needed some kind of closure, some answers. I opened the door and found Ryan standing there, looking exhausted and miserable. He was holding a bottle of wine, one of our mother's favorites, something she used to serve during family dinners. I stared at it for a long moment, remembering all those dinners when Ryan had been my protector, my confidant. Now, he was the one who had torn my life apart. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Can we talk? Please?" I hesitated, every fibre of my being telling me to slam the door in his face. But part of me still craved answers, something to help me understand how we had gotten here. I stepped aside and let him in, though I couldn't bring myself to look at him directly. We sat in the living room, an uncomfortable silence stretching between us. Ryan set the bottle down on the table, but neither of us made a move to open it. He looked like he was waiting for me to say something, but I wasn't sure where to begin. "I don't know what you want me to say," I finally muttered, breaking the silence. "You've already said enough." Ryan looked down at his hands, his fingers fidgeting with the label on the wine bottle. "I know," he said quietly. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I need you to understand how we got here." "How we got here?" I repeated, my voice rising with disbelief. "Ryan, you've been sleeping with my husband. You've been lying to me for a year. What more is there to understand?" He winced, clearly not expecting me to be so direct. "It wasn't like that, Sarah. It wasn't just some fling. I swear, I never wanted this to happen. But Ethan and He stopped, taking a deep breath. "It just happened." I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the wave of anger that was threatening to burst out. "That's not an explanation, Ryan. That's an excuse. You didn't just happen to fall into bed with my husband. You made choices. You both did." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with guilt. "You're right, we did. But it wasn't about hurting you. I love you, Sarah. You're my sister. I never wanted to betray you. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and foreign to my own ears. But you did betray me. You didn't think about me at all when you started this with Ethan. You didn't think about what it would do to me, to my marriage, to our family. Ryan was silent for a moment, his face crumpling with regret. I don't know how to make this right. You can't, I snapped. You can't make it right, Ryan. You and Ethan ruined everything. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, but that's why we thought, if we kept it quiet, if we didn't tell anyone, at least we could avoid making things worse. If you stay married to Ethan, no one has to know. We can keep the family together. I stared at him, barely able to comprehend the audacity of what he was saying. So that's still your plan? To just sweep this all under the rug, to pretend like nothing happened, while you two continue whatever this is? Ryan shook his head, his expression desperate. I don't know what else to do, Sarah. If this gets out, it'll tear our family apart. Mom and Dad, do you think they could handle this? Do you think they'll understand? They're not the ones who need to understand, I shot back. I am, and I don't understand how you could do this to me. He was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. I'm sorry, Sarah. I don't know what else to say. The apology rang hollow. There was nothing he could say that would fix what he had done. The damage was too deep, too raw. He had destroyed my marriage, my trust, and now he was asking me to be complicit in the lie. I need you to leave, I said quietly, my voice shaking with emotion. I can't do this right now. Ryan looked up at me, his face crumpling. Sarah, please. No, I interrupted, standing up. You need to go. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes filled with regret, but he finally nodded. Without another word, he stood up and walked toward the door. I watched him go, feeling a mix of anger and sadness wash over me. This was my brother, someone I had loved and trusted for my entire life, and now I didn't even know who he was anymore. As soon as he was gone, I collapsed onto the couch, tears streaming down my face. The weight of everything came crashing down on me, the betrayal, the lies, the impossible choices they were asking me to make. I had been living in a fantasy, a lie, and now I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces of a life that wasn't even real anymore. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't bring myself to see anyone, to talk to anyone about what had happened. I couldn't even call my parents. How could I? How could I explain that the two people they loved, two people who were supposed to be my family, had betrayed me in the worst possible way? Ethan tried to reach out too. He sent me texts, called me, even left notes on the porch, begging me to talk. But I couldn't. I couldn't face him. Not after everything. The man I had married, the man I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, wasn't who I thought he was. He had been lying to me for so long that I didn't even know what was real anymore. And what hurt the most was that he was asking me to stay, to live this lie, to be part of his charade. But I wasn't going to let them manipulate me. Not anymore. The final straw came when my parents called one evening, concerned that they hadn't heard from me in days. I could hear the worry in my mom's voice, the tension that came from not knowing what was wrong. I wanted to tell them everything, to finally break down and reveal the truth. But I knew that once I did, there would be no going back. The fallout would be enormous, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. Sarah, is everything okay? My mom asked gently. You've been so quiet lately. Is something going on with Ethan? Her words felt like a knife to the chest. She had no idea, no clue about the disaster my life had become. I thought about keeping it all inside, about protecting them from the truth. But then I remembered what Ruan and Ethan were asking of me, to pretend. And I couldn't pretend anymore. As I held the phone, listening to my mother's worried voice, something inside me broke. I couldn't keep the secret any longer. The weight of what had happened between Ethan and Ryan had been crushing me, suffocating me. And now my parents, the people who had raised us, who had always been there for us, were completely in the dark. And I knew it wasn't fair to keep lying. My voice trembled as I finally responded to my mom. "No, Mom, everything's not okay. There's something I need to tell you. Something I've been trying to handle on my own, but I can't anymore." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the tension in her voice when she spoke again. "Sarah, what's going on? You're scaring me." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I couldn't keep holding this in. It's about Ethan and Ryan. The silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity, and I could practically feel my mother's confusion radiating through the phone. "What do you mean? Did something happen with the two of them?" It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to say, but I forced the words out. I walked in on them, Mom. At the family gathering last week. I saw them kissing. Ethan and Ryan. They've been having an affair for a year." The gasp that came from my mother was sharp, and I heard her fumble with the phone before she whispered, "What? What are you saying, Sarah?" Tears welled up in my eyes, and I couldn't hold them back any longer. "I'm saying that my husband, my brother, have been lying to me for a year. They've been sneaking around behind my back. I confronted them, and now they're asking me to stay married to Ethan so they can keep it a secret. They want me to cover for them." The words hung in the air, and for a moment my mother didn't respond. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel the shock and devastation as she processed what I had just told her. When she finally spoke, her voice was trembling. "Sarah, I don't even know what to say. I can't believe this. Ryan and Ethan. How could Ryan do this to you?" "I don't know, Mom," I choked out, my voice thick with tears. "I don't understand it either. But they've been lying to me for so long, and they think the best way to handle it is for me to just stay quiet, to keep pretending everything is fine." There was a long pause before my mother responded, her voice steely now. "Sarah, you don't owe them anything. They've betrayed you in the worst way possible. You can't let them manipulate you into covering for them." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I know. I just didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to break the family apart, but I can't do this anymore." "You don't have to handle this alone," my mother said, her voice firm. "Your father and we're here for you. You're our daughter, and we're going to support you no matter what. But we need to talk to Ryan about this. He can't get away with it." The thought of facing Ryan again made my stomach twist, but I knew she was right. This wasn't something I could keep to myself anymore. They needed to know the truth. Ryan and Ethan had put me in an impossible situation, but I wasn't going to carry their burden anymore. After we hung up, I sat on the couch, my heart still racing. I knew the next few days were going to be hell. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. I didn't have to wait long for the fallout to begin. The next morning, my mother called me again, her voice tense and shaky. "I talked to Ryan last night," she said, her tone heavy. "Your father and I are still trying to wrap our heads around this. Ryan admitted to everything. He's coming over today. We're going to have a family meeting." My heart pounded at the thought of seeing Ryan again, of having to face the mess that he and Ethan had created. "I don't know if I can do this, Mom. I don't know if I can be in the same room with him." "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready," she reassured me. "But you deserve to be there. This isn't something we can sweep under the rug." The idea of a family meeting felt surreal, like we were gathering to talk about a minor disagreement, rather than the fact that my husband and my brother had been having an affair for a year. But I knew I had to be there. I had to confront them both, and I had to hear what they had to say in front of our parents. Later that day, I arrived at my parents' house, my stomach in knots. My father greeted me at the door, his face lined with worry. He didn't say much, just pulled me into a hug that was both comforting and heartbreaking. He looked as broken as I felt. Ryan was already there when I walked into the living room. He sat on the couch, looking miserable, his head hanging low. My mother sat beside him, her face pale but determined. The air in the room was thick with tension, and I could barely stand to be in the same space as my brother. We sat in silence for what felt like forever before my father finally spoke, his voice tight with emotion. "Ryan, you need to explain yourself. You need to tell us why you did this, why you thought it was okay to betray your sister like this." Ryan looked up, his eyes red, his face full of regret. "Dad, I'm sorry. I never wanted any of this to happen. I love Sarah. I never meant to hurt her. But things with Ethan, they got complicated. I didn't plan for it to go this far." My mother's voice was sharp. "You didn't plan for it to go this far. Ryan, you've been lying to your sister for a year. You've been sneaking around with her husband. This isn't some mistake. This is betrayal." Tears filled Ryan's eyes, and he shook his head. "I know, Mom. I know. I don't have an excuse. I was selfish. I didn't think about what this would do to Sarah. I didn't think about how much it would hurt her." The anger I'd been holding back finally broke through, and I spoke, my voice shaking with fury. "No, you didn't think about me, Ryan. You only thought about yourself. You and Ethan decided what you wanted was more important than my life, my marriage. And now you're trying to make me cover for you, like I'm some kind of accessory to your lies." Ryan looked at me, his face full of guilt. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I really am. I wish I could take it all back." My father shook his head, his voice full of disappointment. "Sorry isn't enough, Ryan. You've broken this family. I don't know how we're supposed to move past this." The room fell silent again, the weight of my father's words pressing down on all of us. I could see the pain in my parents' faces, the heartbreak of realizing that their son had betrayed their daughter, that their family had been shattered by something so deeply wrong. Finally, my mother spoke again, her voice quiet but firm. "Sarah, whatever you decide to do next, we'll support you. Whether you stay with Ethan or leave him, whether you want to cut ties with Ryan or not, that's your choice. But you don't have to protect them. You don't have to live a lie to keep this family together." Her words hit me like a wave of relief. I have been so caught up in the idea of keeping the family intact, of not wanting to be the one to break everything apart, that I hadn't allowed myself to consider that maybe it wasn't my responsibility. Maybe it wasn't my job to fix what they had broken. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to keep their secret. I wasn't going to stay in a marriage built on lies. "I'm done," I said quietly, my voice steady for the first time in days. "I'm not staying with Ethan, and I'm not going to cover for either of you." Ryan's face crumpled, but I didn't care. He had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. I wasn't going to be dragged down by their lies any longer. It was time to move forward. The day after the family meeting felt like stepping into a new reality. Everything had changed. There was no going back now, no pretending that my life could return to the way it was before I found out about Ethan and Ryan. The truth was out. My parents knew. I knew, and I was done pretending. The following morning, I woke up with a strange sense of calm, despite the chaos that had unfolded. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had control over my life again. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to let Ethan and Ryan manipulate me into keeping their secret. I wasn't going to stay married just to keep up appearances. That part of my life was over. I had an appointment with my lawyer that afternoon to begin the divorce process. It felt surreal, sitting in an office, discussing the end of my marriage, signing papers to legally cut ties with a man I had once believed I would spend my life with. but there was a strange sense of liberation in it too. I wasn't bound to Ethan anymore. I wasn't trapped in their lies. As I sat across from my lawyer, going over the details of the divorce, she looked at me with a kind but serious expression. "You're doing the right thing, Sarah. I know it's hard now, but you'll be better off in the long run." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "I know. It's just, I still can't believe any of this happened." She gave me a sympathetic smile. "It's going to take time, but you've already taken the hardest step. You've chosen yourself, and that's what matters." The words stuck with me as I left the office, clutching the paperwork that would formally end my marriage. I had chosen myself. After everything I had been through, the lies, the betrayal, I had finally decided that I deserved better. It was a strange mix of sadness and relief. When I got back home, I found Ethan waiting on the porch. He stood up as soon as he saw me, his face tense, eyes filled with regret. I wasn't surprised that he had shown up. I'd been avoiding his calls and texts, but it was only a matter of time before he came to face me in person. "Sarah," he said quietly, taking a tentative step toward me. "Can we talk? Please?" I hesitated for a moment, feeling the familiar anger bubble up inside me, but I nodded. "Fine. Talk." He followed me inside, and we stood in the living room, the same room where we had once shared so many happy moments. Now, it felt like a graveyard of memories, a place haunted by everything that had happened between us. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his face etched with guilt. "I know there's nothing I can say to make this right. I've hurt you in a way that I can never take back. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I crossed my arms, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Sorry isn't enough, Ethan. You lied to me for a year. You betrayed me with my brother. How do you think sorry is supposed to fix that?" He flinched, but nodded, accepting the harshness of my words. "I know it's not enough. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I wanted you to know that I never meant to hurt you like this. I was confused. About everything. About my feelings for Ryan, about our marriage. But none of that excuses what I did." I stared at him, feeling a strange sense of detachment. "So why didn't you tell me the truth? If you were confused, why didn't you just say something instead of sneaking around behind my back?" Ethan looked down, shame written all over his face. "I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to face the reality of what was happening. I thought if we could keep it quiet, we could figure it out without destroying everything." I shook my head, barely able to believe what I was hearing. "And you thought lying to me was better than telling me the truth? You thought I wouldn't figure it out eventually?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I was selfish. I didn't think about how much it would hurt you." A bitter laugh escaped me. "No, you didn't. You only thought about yourself. And Ryan. And now you both want me to cover for you, like I owe you something. But I don't owe you anything, Ethan. Not anymore." His eyes met mine, and I could see the desperation there, the regret. "I know I've ruined everything, but I still care about you, Sarah. I know that doesn't mean much now, but I need you to know that I never stopped caring about you." I felt a pang of sadness at his words. Maybe he did still care about me, but it didn't matter anymore. Whatever we had was broken beyond repair. "It doesn't change anything," I said softly. "I'm filing for divorce. This marriage is over." Ethan's face fell, and for a moment he looked like he might argue. But he didn't. He just nodded, accepting the inevitable. "I understand." There was a long, heavy silence between us, the weight of our shared history pressing down on the room. This was the end of everything we had built together, the end of the life we had planned. But in that moment, I felt a sense of peace too. I was finally letting go. "I'm sorry for what I did," Ethan said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I hope one day you'll be able to forgive me." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure if forgiveness was something I could ever give him. Maybe one day, but not now. Not yet. After he left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring out into the empty street, feeling the weight of the past year lift off my shoulders. I had been living in a lie for so long, and now I was finally free. But the hardest part was still facing Ryan. Later that week, I went to my parents' house for dinner. I hadn't spoken to Ryan since the family meeting, but my mom had insisted that we all sit down together. She was trying to keep the family intact, even though we all knew things would never be the same. When I walked in, Ryan was already there, sitting awkwardly at the kitchen table. He looked up at me as I entered, his eyes filled with regret, but I couldn't bring myself to meet his gaze. I wasn't ready for that yet. Dinner was tense. My parents tried to make small talk, but the conversation was strained. No one knew what to say, and the silence between us felt like it could crack at any moment. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ryan cleared his throat. "Sarah, I know you don't want to hear this, but I need to say it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything I've done, for hurting you, for betraying you. I never meant to let it get this far." I stared at my plate, the food untouched. "You didn't mean for it to get this far, but it did. And now everything is ruined. Our relationship, my marriage, it's all destroyed because of what you did." Ryan's voice broke. "I know. I'll never be able to make up for it. But I hope someday you can forgive me. You're my sister, Sarah. I don't want to lose you." I looked up at him, tears in my eyes, and for the first time, I saw the brother I had always loved, the one who had been there for me through everything. But now, that version of him was buried under the weight of the betrayal. I didn't know if I could ever find my way back to him. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Ryan," I said quietly. "Not now. Maybe one day, but not today." He nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. "I understand." And with that, we fell back into silence. After dinner, I hugged my parents goodbye and left. The air was cool, and as I drove home, I realized that I had already made my peace with everything. The pain of the betrayal would take time to heal, but I had chosen to move forward. I had chosen myself, and that was enough.